But here's what most men don't realize. Are you doing everything right, showing up, being dependable, trying to be close, yet still sensing a quiet distance you can't quite explain? That feeling of warmth just out of reach, of connection that used to come naturally but now feels fragile, is something I hear every day. I'm a board-certified urologist, and I've worked with men for decades on performance, confidence, and real connection. There's one overlooked habit that changes how a woman feels, emotionally and physically. Tell me where you're watching from, and like and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming. But here's what most men don't realize. Intimacy after 50 doesn't fade, it changes. And the men who struggle the most are often the ones still using the same approach they used decades ago. I see this all the time in my practice. Men come in worried about performance, frequency, desire. But when we talk, what's really missing isn't ability, it's connection. After 50, intimacy becomes less about intensity and far more about safety, presence, and trust. And kissing, when done right, becomes more powerful than it ever was before. Over the years, I've sat across from countless long-term couples. They love each other, they're loyal, they've built a life together, but something subtle has shifted. The urgency of youth is gone, and many men interpret that as loss. In reality, it's a transition. Emotional intimacy starts to matter more than physical urgency. Women, especially as they age, become far more sensitive to how a moment begins, not just how it ends. And that's where many men unknowingly step off track. Here's what I tell my patients. Before a woman's body responds, her nervous system needs to feel safe. That sense of safety doesn't come from speed or intensity. It comes from presence, from feeling seen, from knowing she's not being rushed toward an outcome. A lot of men don't realize that when affection becomes goal-oriented, even subtly, it changes how it's received. What feels like enthusiasm to you can feel like pressure to her. Biology plays a role here, but it's simpler than most people think. Testosterone tends to push men toward action and results. Oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone, thrives on calm, connection, and emotional pacing. As relationships mature, oxytocin becomes far more important for intimacy than raw drive. Kissing, especially slow, intentional kissing, is one of the fastest ways to stimulate that sense of bonding, but only if it's done without rushing. One of the most common silent mistakes I see men make after 50 is skipping over affection. They move quickly from 0 to 60, not because they're careless, but because they assume familiarity replaces the need for emotional build-up. In long-term relationships, the opposite is true. Familiarity increases the need for reassurance. A kiss that once felt automatic now needs intention behind it. This is where many men misunderstand kissing. They start to see it as foreplay, a means to an end, instead of what it really is, communication. A kiss says, "I'm here." It says, "You're safe with me." It says, "I'm not in a hurry." When that message is missing, everything that follows feels disconnected, no matter how technically fine it may be. I often remind men that their most powerful tool hasn't disappeared with age. It's simply been forgotten. The ability to slow down, to lead emotionally, to let a moment breathe. When you approach intimacy with intention instead of expectation, something shifts. The pressure leaves the room, the body follows the mind, and connection starts to rebuild itself naturally. The actionable insight here is simple but not always easy. Slow down your initiation. Let affection start without a destination. Focus on what you're communicating, not what you hope will happen next. When kissing becomes an expression of presence rather than a step in a sequence, it changes how it's felt on the other side. And once men truly understand this shift, once they feel the difference between urgency and intention, the first kissing spot suddenly makes sense, and everything begins to fall into place. But here's what most men don't realize. One of the most powerful kisses you can give has nothing to do with seduction at all. In fact, many men overlook it precisely because it feels too simple, too gentle, almost insignificant. Yet this kiss speaks louder than words ever could. When placed on the forehead or the upper face, it sends a message that goes far deeper than desire. It tells a woman she's protected, seen, and respected. And for men over 50, that message carries extraordinary weight. In my years working with couples, I've learned that safety is the foundation of desire, not the opposite of it. A woman's ability to relax into closeness depends on how safe her body feels in the moment. And safety isn't created through intensity or urgency. It's created through calm presence. A forehead kiss does exactly that. It slows the moment down. It signals steadiness. It tells her, without a single word, that she doesn't need to brace herself or anticipate what comes next. From a physiological standpoint, this kind of kiss has a calming effect on the nervous system. When you approach gently, when your posture is relaxed and your breathing is slow, her body senses it immediately. The shoulders soften, the breath deepens, tension begins to melt. This isn't something most men are taught to pay attention to, but it's something women feel instinctively. Before attraction can grow, the nervous system has to stand down. I remember speaking with a patient in his early 60s who felt his wife had grown distant over the years. He assumed it was loss of interest or age. When we talked more deeply, it became clear that what she missed wasn't passion, it was reassurance. When he began greeting her with a simple, intentional kiss on the forehead, without expectation, something shifted. She felt acknowledged again, valued, safe, and closeness returned naturally, without forcing anything. Timing matters with this kiss. It works best when it's not leading anywhere, when you give it as a greeting, or in a quiet moment, or before sleep. Not as a prelude, but as a statement. The power of this kiss lies in its lack of agenda. When there's no pressure attached, it becomes deeply meaningful. Subconsciously, this kiss communicates emotional strength. It says you're grounded, that you don't need to rush or prove anything, that you're confident enough to be gentle. Many men underestimate how attractive that quality is, especially later in life. Masculine presence isn't about dominance or intensity. It's about calm leadership, about being steady when everything else feels rushed. There's also something deeply reassuring about the way this kiss frames the face. It's personal without being invasive, close without being demanding. It honors her space while still expressing affection, and that balance is what builds trust over time. If you're going to use this kiss intentionally, focus on how you show up in the moment. Make eye contact first. Stand tall but relaxed. Let your movements be unhurried. When you lean in, do so calmly. Hold the kiss for just a moment longer than feels habitual, then pull back without lingering or waiting for a response. The stillness afterward is just as important as the kiss itself. This is not about technique, it's about presence. When you're fully there, emotionally and physically, she feels it. And that feeling lingers long after the moment passes. But as powerful as safety is, it's only one piece of the puzzle, because safety alone isn't what awakens attraction. There's another spot that reignites closeness, and most men approach it the wrong way. But here's what most men don't realize. The side of the neck isn't just a physical area, it's an emotional one. When approached with patience, it has the power to reconnect a woman to how it felt to be desired, not pressured. This is where emotion and sensation quietly meet. And for many long-term couples, it's one of the first places where closeness fades, not because it stops working, but because it's rushed or mistimed. The neck is emotionally charged because it's vulnerable. It's close to the face, the breath, the pulse. When someone is relaxed enough to allow closeness there, it signals trust. That's why this kiss works so well when it's given slowly, without urgency. It doesn't demand anything. It simply invites a feeling. And feelings, especially in mature relationships, are what bring intimacy back to life. Anticipation plays a crucial role here. Desire doesn't come from being surprised or overwhelmed. It comes from being allowed to sense what's coming. When you take your time, when you let a moment build instead of rushing through it, her body starts to remember. Emotional memory is powerful. It reconnects her not just to you, but to past moments of closeness, warmth, and being wanted in a way that felt safe. One of the biggest mistakes men make with this kiss is moving too fast. They lean in abruptly, they stay too long, or they approach it when the emotional tone isn't right. This isn't about access, it's about timing. If her body hasn't relaxed yet, the kiss lands flat, or worse, it creates tension. What many men interpret as disinterest is often just her nervous system asking for more patience. I often explain to my patients that emotional memory drives intimacy far more than physical repetition. A woman doesn't respond because something feels new. She responds because something feels familiar in the right way. This kiss, when done with care, brings back that sense of being cherished without expectation. And that's something many women haven't felt in a long time. There's also an important distinction between gentle pacing and performance anxiety. When a man is focused on doing something right, the moment tightens. But when he's present and unhurried, the energy softens. The side of the neck responds to calm attention, not intensity. It's about closeness, not conquest. Over time, this kiss can quietly rebuild connection in relationships that feel distant. I've seen couples who barely touched rediscover comfort with each other simply by slowing down and reintroducing this kind of affection without pressure. It reminds her that intimacy can still feel easy, natural, warm. The actionable insight here is subtle but essential. Use pauses, let silence exist, allow space between moments, and most importantly, let her lean in. Don't chase the moment. If she moves closer, that's your cue. If she doesn't, stay relaxed. The absence of pressure is what makes this kiss meaningful. When done this way, the side of the neck becomes less about touch and more about trust. And once that trust is felt again, something deeper starts to open. And then there's the third spot, the one most men completely overlook, but the one that often carries the deepest emotional meaning of all. But here's what most men don't realize. The hands carry more emotional meaning than almost any other part of the body. They're often ignored, dismissed as ordinary, yet they symbolize reliability, safety, and trust in a way few gestures can. A kiss on the hands or fingers doesn't try to impress. It doesn't rush. It quietly communicates commitment, steadiness, and patience. And for many women, especially later in life, that message lands deeper than anything overtly romantic ever could. Hands represent what you do in the world. They're how you build, protect, work, and care. Over decades of a relationship, they become associated with dependability. When you hold her hands calmly, when you kiss them without fanfare, it tells her something powerful. You're still here, grounded and emotionally present. That kind of reassurance is incredibly meaningful as bodies change and life becomes more complex. I've noticed in my practice that this gesture works especially well for men over 60. By this stage, many couples have navigated health scares, surgeries, stress, and the quiet fears that come with aging. Those experiences can create emotional distance without anyone intending it. A kiss on the hands gently lowers defenses that may have built up over time. It doesn't demand vulnerability, it invites it. Subtle touch is one of the most effective forms of emotional signaling. When it's calm and sincere, it tells her she doesn't need to guard herself. There's no rush, no expectation, just presence. And presence is what restores trust when words feel inadequate or awkward. I've seen men rediscover closeness after years of distance simply by reintroducing this kind of affection. One patient told me that after his heart surgery, physical intimacy felt intimidating for both of them. But holding his wife's hands and kissing them quietly became a bridge back to connection. It reminded her that intimacy didn't have to be complicated or risky. It could be gentle, safe, familiar. This gesture also carries a sense of masculine dignity that often gets overlooked. There's strength in gentleness, confidence in patience. When you're secure enough to slow down and express affection without expectation, it communicates emotional maturity. And that's deeply attractive, especially in long-term relationships. The key is to keep it natural. Don't announce it. Don't linger excessively. Let it happen in a quiet moment while sitting together, during conversation, or before parting for the day. Take her hand calmly. Kiss it once, maybe twice, then release it without waiting for a reaction. The sincerity of the moment is what makes it meaningful. This isn't about reviving the past. It's about honoring the present, acknowledging everything you've built together, and reminding her in a simple, human way that she's valued. When done with intention, this kiss restores emotional trust, not by force, but by familiarity. It says, "We're still us." And that reassurance can open doors that have been quietly closed for years. Now, here's what I tell every man who thinks it's too late, because what comes next matters more than any single gesture ever could. But here's what most men don't realize. I've worked with men in their 60s and 70s who genuinely believed connection was behind them. They sat across from me with quiet regret, convinced they had missed their chance, that time had closed a door they could never reopen. And I want you to know something clearly, that belief is far more common than it is true. Distance doesn't mean failure. It means life happened, and life leaves marks on every relationship. Regret, fear, and uncertainty are normal at this stage. Bodies change, energy changes, confidence takes a few hits along the way. Many men carry these worries silently, telling themselves they should be grateful for what they have and stop wanting more. But wanting connection isn't weakness. It's human, and it doesn't disappear with age. It just asks to be approached differently. What I've learned over decades of working with men is that dignity matters now more than ever. Masculine calm, patience, the ability to stay grounded instead of forcing moments. These qualities aren't losses of youth, they're gains of experience, and they're exactly what allow intimacy to return when it feels like it's slipping away. Intimacy after 50 isn't about performance, it's about presence. It's about how you enter a room, how you sit beside her, how you touch without asking for anything back. When you stop trying to recreate the past and start honoring the present, something shifts, the pressure dissolves, and in that space, closeness can breathe again. I've seen small changes create profound emotional shifts, a slower pace, a gentler touch, a moment of intention where there used to be habit. These aren't dramatic gestures, they're quiet ones, but they're powerful because they signal care without condition. And that's what most relationships are starving for, not more effort, but more intention. Men often ask me if they're doing it right, and I always tell them the same thing. It's never about technique, it's about how she feels in your presence. If she feels safe, seen, and unhurried, you're already on the right path. The rest unfolds naturally. If you've been feeling like it's too late, I want you to pause. Take a breath. It isn't. Connection isn't something you run out of. It's something you return to. And when you lead with calm intention instead of expectation, you give both of you permission to reconnect. And that's where the final step comes in, because this isn't just about understanding, it's about choosing to move forward together. But here's what most men don't realize, and this is where I want to close the loop we opened at the beginning. The overlooked solution was never a trick, a technique, or trying harder. It was emotional signaling through intentional kissing. Simple gestures done with calm presence communicate more safety, trust, and desire than force ever could. When you change how you begin a moment, you change how it's received, and that's what restores closeness. The men who benefit most from this aren't trying to impress. They're the ones who care, who lead quietly, who show up with steadiness instead of urgency. If you've stayed with this video, it tells me you're that kind of man, someone who wants connection not just for himself, but for the relationship he's built over years of life, work, and responsibility. If this helped you, I invite you to join our community and subscribe so you never miss future guidance designed specifically for men like you. This isn't about chasing youth, It's about aging with confidence, dignity, and emotional strength alongside others who understand what that really means. I'd also encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments, not to brag, not to perform, but to connect. Often, the simple act of realizing you're not alone is where real change begins. And remember this, you deserve confidence, energy, closeness, and deep restorative sleep. You deserve relationships that feel safe and alive at the same time. Take care of your health and your relationships because you are worth it.